She was not waiting for someone to notice, not checking the door, not adjusting her expression into something more accommodating, not doing the small, careful things a person does when they are hoping to be included. She was already still, already settled into the specific posture of a woman who had decided, sometime in the last 40 minutes, that she was going to get through this evening on her own terms and no one else's. Her left hand rested flat on the white linen beside her untouched bread plate, the way you rest a hand when you need something to hold, without appearing to need anything. Her right hand held the stem of a wine glass she had not drunk from. The glass was there because having something to hold changes the geometry of sitting alone. She had learned that in 3 years of business dinners in cities that were not hers, the table seated 22. She had counted without meaning to. 12 of them were speaking Korean she could not follow. 6 were in a separate conversation at the far end she had been edged out of 40 minutes ago, not by rudeness, by the specific social gravity of shared language, shared history, shared everything she was not part of. The other 3 were the man to her left who had introduced himself once and then turned away, the empty chair to her right, and herself. She knew this particular kind of alone, the kind that happens inside a full room, the kind that has its own sound. A low, pressurized silence underneath the noise of everyone else's conversation. She had been sitting inside it for long enough that it had stopped feeling like a temporary condition and started feeling like the evening's actual shape. She was fine. She was managing. She had done harder things than this before dinner. She did not know yet that the evening had not decided its shape. Not yet. The restaurant occupied the 47th floor of a glass tower in Gangnam, the kind of building that exists to remind you exactly how far you are from the ground. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows on Yanara's left, Seoul spread itself in every direction. Not the postcard version. The real one. A city so dense with light it had its own atmosphere, a low amber glow rising from 10 million lives being lived simultaneously, indifferent and magnificent, utterly unaware that anything of consequence was or was not happening on the 47th floor. The dining room itself was a study in deliberate restraint. Dark timber paneling, cream linen, a single orchid at the center of each table, white, stem cut precisely. No music. The absence of music in a room like this was itself a statement, a declaration that nothing as vulgar as atmosphere was required because the view and the company were presumed to be enough. The company, tonight, belonged to Kang Tae-woo's world. His alone. Yanara had known that before she arrived. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, thoroughly and without illusion. She had read the company's last 4 annual reports on the flight from London. She had memorized the names and roles of the senior leadership team. She had worn the black dress that read as serious without reading as someone trying to appear serious. She had arrived 7 minutes early, which in her experience was the correct amount of early for a dinner where you were the only person who looked like her. None of that preparation had addressed the particular quality of being seated at a table where the conversation reorganized itself around your presence the way water reorganizes around a stone. Not hostile, not deliberate. Simply a current that moved in a direction that did not include her, and had been moving that way for so long it no longer required anyone's intention. The food arrived in courses she had not ordered. Each plate was extraordinary. She ate with attention because the food deserved it, and because having something to focus on gave her somewhere to put her eyes that was not the face of the man 3 seats to her left who had asked her, 40 minutes ago, which department she was in, and when she said she was the lead consultant on the restructuring proposal, had nodded with the precise nod of someone filing information under a category they had not expected. She had noted it. Filed it, continued eating. Outside, Seoul burned quietly against the dark. Inside, the evening continued its careful performance of itself. She had made several decisions today that she was now quietly auditing. She had accepted this dinner invitation when she should have declined it. She had known when the email arrived, 3 weeks ago, that a table of 22 senior Korean executives and one foreign consultant was not a formula for meaningful connection. It was a formula for exactly this. She had accepted anyway because declining felt like retreat, and she did not retreat. She had not told her colleague Britta about the dinner. Britta had offered twice to come, not because she was invited, because she was the kind of person who understood that some rooms required a second body simply to change the temperature. Yanara had said she would be fine. She was fine. That was not the point. She had booked a return car for 11. It was currently 8:47. She had 2 hours and 13 minutes left of being fine, and she had carried the resignation letter. That was the thing she kept returning to. Folded into the inner pocket of her coat, hanging now on the rack by the restaurant entrance. 12 sentences she had written and rewritten over 4 days. She had not planned to submit it tonight. She had not planned not to. She had simply brought it with her the way you bring an umbrella when you are not certain about the sky. She was 6 items into that quiet audit when she heard it. Not loud, not insistent, not the kind of sound that demands anything. It was small the way a held breath is small. A presence rather than a noise. Coming from somewhere behind her left shoulder, from the narrow corridor that ran between the private dining room and the main restaurant floor, half hidden behind a panel of frosted glass she had assumed was decorative. She did not turn immediately. She sat with it for 1 full second, maybe 2. The length of time it takes to decide whether you heard what you think you heard, or whether a room full of conversation is simply playing tricks on a person sitting too quietly inside it. Then it came again. Not a cry. Not distress in any form she could have pointed to and named clearly. Just a voice. Small. Trying very hard not to be heard by the wrong people and not yet sure who the wrong people were. She found the gap in the frosted panel with her eyes before she moved. A child. A girl. 8 years old, perhaps. Possibly younger. She was wearing a dress that had been chosen for a formal occasion and had the particular look of a child who had been dressed carefully by someone else and had since been sitting somewhere alone long enough for the careful to start coming undone. One white ribbon in her hair, the other missing. Her eyes, when they found Yanara's, were not frightened. They were considering. The girl did not speak again immediately. She simply looked. The way children look when they are deciding whether an adult is safe, not based on what the adult has said, because the adult has said nothing, but based on something else entirely. Something they cannot explain and do not need to. Yanara pushed her chair back from the table. She did not finish the thought she had been thinking. She did not check whether anyone at the table noticed her moving. The resignation letter in her coat pocket had existed, 3 seconds ago, as the most significant thing in the room. It no longer did. The corridor behind the frosted panel was narrow and smelled faintly of cedar and cold ventilation air. A service passage, functional and plain, nothing like the room it ran alongside. 2 folding chairs were stacked against the far wall. A coat hook held a child-sized navy parka that had not been reached for in some time. The girl stood in the center of the corridor with her arms at her sides and her chin slightly raised, the posture of someone who had decided that whatever happened next, she was going to face it without flinching. Yanara crouched to her level, not slowly, not with the exaggerated gentleness people sometimes perform for children. Just down, direct, eye to eye. She said nothing at first. She had learned from a decade of negotiations in rooms where the stakes were high and the trust was thin that silence offered first was worth more than any question. It gave the other person room to decide what they wanted to give you. The girl looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, in English that was careful and precise, and had clearly been practiced, "Can you pretend to be my mom? Just for a little while. Just until the dinner is finished." The corridor was very quiet. Yanara did not react the way most adults would have. She did not smile reassuringly or deflect with a gentle question, or immediately begin looking around for whoever should be responsible for this child. She looked at the girl the way she looked at anything that required her full understanding before she responded to it. "Tell me your name first," she said. "Sayori," the girl said. "Okay, Sayori. My name is Yanara." A pause. "Why do you need someone to pretend?" Sayori's eyes moved briefly to the frosted panel, toward the sound of the dinner beyond it. "My father's colleagues keep coming to check on me. They say things like, 'Where your mother is tonight,' and they look at me like the answer is sad. And I don't want them to look at me like that anymore." She said it with the particular dignity of a child who has been absorbing adult discomfort for long enough that she has developed a system for it. Yanara was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been back here?" "Since the appetizers." "Has anyone brought you food?" Sayori pointed to a small plate on the floor near the folding chairs. A single bread roll and 3 pieces of fruit, arranged with a care that suggested someone had been trying. The plate was mostly untouched. Yanara sat down on the floor of the corridor, fully. Her black dress, her composed evening posture, all of it, just sat down on the plain concrete floor of a service passage on the 47th floor of a Gangnam tower, because the girl was standing over a child who needed steadying was not the right geometry for this. Sayori stared at her. "Sit with me," Yanara said. Sayori sat, cross-legged, mirroring Yanara without seeming to notice she was doing it. They sat like that for a moment. From beyond the frosted panel, the muffled percussion of 22 people having dinner continued its indifferent rhythm. Cutlery, low laughter. The particular cadence of Korean spoken at a formal table. "How often does your father bring you to dinners like this?" Yanara asked. "Not usually. My regular sitter is sick. He didn't want to leave me at home with someone new." Sayori said this the way she said everything, carefully, as though she had already translated it once before speaking it. "He thought I would be okay sitting in here with my book." "Where's your book?" Sayori reached beside her and produced a battered paperback from somewhere in the folds of her dress. Yanara read The Spine, an illustrated Korean mythology collection, the kind aimed at children but substantial enough to challenge them. "Good book," she said. Sayori looked at her, a flicker of reassessment crossing her face. "You know it?" "I know of it. I haven't read this edition." Sayori considered this. Then, "The story about Jeosung Saja is the best one. He's the death messenger, but in this version he's not scary. He's just doing his job and he's tired." Yanara looked at her. "That's a very good observation about that character." Something in Sayori's face settled. Not relaxed, settled. The way a compass settles when it has found north. Now, the thing Yanara had not disclosed, and would not disclose, not to Sayori, not to anyone in that building that night, was the conversation she had been carrying since before she arrived. The phone call that morning from the London office, the one that had not been a formal notice but had been clear enough that it did not need to be. The project was under review. Her contract extension, which she had been expecting to sign in 2 weeks, was in question. The restructuring proposal that she had spent 4 months building might be handed to a different team, someone already inside the company, someone who did not need a visa, did not need a liaison, did not need the particular and expensive process of being Yanara working in Seoul. She had known, sitting at that table 40 minutes ago, that tonight was probably the last dinner, the last formal occasion, possibly the last month. The resignation letter was not an umbrella. It was a response to weather that had already arrived. She had been managing that knowledge all evening with the same stillness she applied to everything, filed it, converted it to a list, kept it from her face. She was still managing it now, on the floor of a service corridor with a child who needed someone to be steady, and she gave that steadiness in full, and kept the cost entirely to herself. "Your father," she said to Sayori. "Does he know you're finding it hard tonight?" Sayori thought about this with genuine care. "He knows I'm quiet. He doesn't always know what the quiet means." Yanara nodded. She understood that. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I can do. I can't pretend to be your mother. That's not something I'm going to do because you deserve something real, not a performance. But I can sit here with you. For as long as you need. And if anyone comes through that panel and asks who I am, you can tell them I'm a friend of your father's who is keeping you company. That is true. I am at your father's dinner, and I am keeping you company." Sayori looked at her carefully. "Is that the same thing?" "It's better," Yanara said. "Because it's actually true." The girl considered this with the full rigor she appeared to apply to everything. Then she nodded. Once, with the gravity of someone who had been offered a reasonable amendment to an unreasonable situation and had decided to accept it. She picked up her book. Yanara stayed where she was, cross-legged on the plain concrete back against the wall. From the dining room, she could hear the evening's conversation shifting into the register that meant the main course was being cleared. She had 2, perhaps 3, courses left before the dinner concluded. She had been sitting alone at that table for most of the evening because the room's current did not run in her direction. She was now sitting on a concrete floor in a service corridor with a child who read mythology and had been protecting her own dignity since the appetizers. She was aware, distantly, that she had not thought once about the resignation letter in the last 8 minutes. That was the first time all evening that had happened. Now, before we go any further, I need you to stop for a second, because if you are watching this and thinking, "She just left the table, no one asked her to, she doesn't even know this child," she sat down on a concrete floor in an evening dress at a dinner that was already going badly for her professionally, and she did all of that quietly, without making it a moment, without anyone even seeing it. I need you to sit with what that actually costs. She had nothing to gain from that corridor, no audience, no credit. The people at the table who had not included her in their conversation were not watching. Her colleagues were not watching. Her client was not watching. There was not a single person in that building who would have judged her for simply walking back to her seat and finishing her dinner and going home. She went into that corridor anyway, and she sat down in that service passage anyway, and she stayed. That is the thing about character. It does not perform. It does not wait for a witness. It simply does what it does in the narrow corridor on the plain floor, with nobody watching, because it cannot do anything else. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, because what happens when the dinner ends and the lights come on is the part that changes everything. 3 things happened in the next hour that nobody planned. The first was small. One of the senior directors, a man named Wu Changsik, who had been at Kang Tai-woo's right hand for 11 years and understood the architecture of a room better than most people understood their own living rooms, noticed the empty chair. He had been noticing it for 20 minutes before he did anything about it. He excused himself from the table, walked to the glass partition, looked through the gap, and stopped. What he saw was this. The foreign consultant, the one from London, the one whose name he had not retained, whose presence at the dinner he had categorized as peripheral, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the service corridor in a black dress, reading aloud in a low voice from a child's mythology book. Sayori was beside her, equally cross-legged, her white ribbon restored to her hair, listening with the complete and total attention she usually reserved for things she had decided were worth her time. Changsik stood at the gap in the panel for a moment. He did not interrupt. He went back to the table, sat down, and said nothing to anyone. But he looked, once, across the table at Kang Tai-woo. The second thing that happened was that a junior staff member, a woman called Mira who managed event logistics for the company and had been quietly ensuring the evening ran correctly from a small anteroom down the hall, came through the corridor to check on Saori and found her mid-conversation with Yanara about whether the character of Jeosung Saja in the mythology book would have been kinder or crueler if he had been allowed to choose his own work. Saori was arguing that he would have been kinder. Yanara was arguing that the question was more complicated than that, because a person who chooses their own burden carries it differently than one who was assigned it, and differently does not always mean more gently. Saori was considering this with genuine concentration. Mira stood in the doorway for a moment, assessed the situation, decided that whatever was happening was better than what had been happening before, and went back to the anteroom. She told her colleague Jisoo, in the quiet, direct way she delivered all information she considered significant, that Saori was fine, that the consultant from London was with her, and that the consultant was not speaking to her the way adults usually spoke to Saori, as though she were a thing to be managed, but the way you speak to someone you have decided is worth your full attention. Jisoo wrote that down on the notepad she kept for things that felt like they needed to exist somewhere. The third thing that happened was that the dinner ended. Not abruptly, the way formal dinners at this level always ended, in a long, gradual exhale, dessert cleared, tea offered, the particular social choreography of departure beginning its slow first movements. Yanara heard the shift in acoustic quality through the glass partition, the rhythm of the room-changing register. She looked at Saori. The dinner is finishing. Saori listened, confirmed it with her own assessment, and nodded. You should go back. I should take you back, Yanara said. To your father? Saori considered the distinction. Together? Together, Yanara said. They stood. Yanara straightened her dress, which had survived the concrete floor with more dignity than it had any right to. Saori adjusted her ribbon. They walked back through the frosted panel into the dining room. The effect was not dramatic. There was no moment where the room stopped and turned. But there was a quality of noticing, a shift in the peripheral attention of several people at once, as Yanara walked Saori back toward the head of the table where Kang Tae-woo was standing, mid-conversation, and his back to them. His chief of staff, Kwon Dae-sik, saw them first. A man of extraordinary professional stillness, the kind cultivated specifically to be useful in moments when stillness mattered, he touched Kang Tae-woo's arm once, briefly. Tae-woo turned. He saw Saori first. The thing that moved through his face when he saw her was not relief exactly, because relief implies a fear that had been permitted to exist, and Tae-woo did not permit fears to exist in his face. What it was, precisely, was the quiet settling of something that had been braced. He looked at his daughter for a second. The way you look at something you need to confirm is real, and then his eyes moved to the woman beside her. He had been told Yanara Obi was the lead consultant on the restructuring proposal. He had read her executive summary. He had formed, from that summary, a precise and detailed picture of her professional capability. What he had not done, what nobody at the table had done, was account for her as a person, fully, in 3 dimensions. He stood looking at her for a moment longer than was professionally standard. Then Saori, who operated on her own timeline and was not interested in the social protocols of adult silences, said, Appa, this is Yanara. She sat with me. She knows about Jeosung Saja. Tae-woo looked at his daughter, then at Yanara. I know of the book, Yanara said, in the tone of someone who is answering the question underneath the question. She's very well read. She is, Tae-woo said. There was a pause. Thank you. It was 2 words. It carried the full weight of a man who understood exactly what had happened and was choosing, in a room of 22 colleagues, to contain what he felt about it to those 2 words and no more. Yanara received it with a nod. Saori, satisfied that the correct introductions had been made, reached up and took her father's hand. Changsik, watching from 4 feet away, turned slightly away and looked at the view. The city below the 47th floor continued its indifferent and magnificent business, entirely unaware that anything of consequence had just concluded above it. Now I want to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer it honestly. Not to me, but to yourself. If you had been at that table tonight, if you had spent 40 minutes being edged out of every conversation, seated in a room where the current ran in every direction except yours, carrying a resignation letter in your coat pocket and a phone call in your chest that had told you this morning that the thing you had spent 4 months building might be taken and given to someone else, if all of that had been the shape of your evening, and then a child's voice came from behind that panel of glass, would you have gone? Comment below. Right now. Because I think the honest answers are going to be more complicated than most people expect. And I think the complicated ones are the most important. Here is what I want to tell you about the woman who walked out of that building at 10:53 and stood in the lobby waiting for her car. Her coat was on. The resignation letter was still in the inner pocket. Same fold, same 12 sentences. She had not submitted it. She had not decided not to. It existed in the same condition it had existed in when she arrived, which meant the decision it represented was still open, still sitting in the part of her mind that managed things she had not yet resolved. What had changed was the weight of it. Not lighter, not heavier. Different. The way an object changes not in mass but in meaning, when you have spent the better part of an evening in the company of someone who reorganized your sense of what the evening was for. She did not do feelings the way other people did feelings. She had learned, a long time ago, in a series of rooms, not unlike the one upstairs, that feelings needed a structure, or they became weather. So she had built herself a very good structure. She converted everything into assessment, into lists, into the clean, actionable language of someone who was going to handle things. The structure had served her well for 3 years in Seoul. It had served her well through the phone call that morning, and through the dinner, and through the corridor. It was serving her now. And yet, she was aware, standing in the lobby, of something she could not convert. Not a feeling exactly. More like a fact that had not existed before this evening and now did, and was waiting patiently to be categorized. The fact was Sayori's face when Yanara had said, "It's better," because it's actually true. The fact was a child in a formal dress who had been managing adult discomfort since the appetizers, and who had, at some point during that hour in the corridor, stopped managing and simply been. The fact was that Yanara had been the reason for that. Not through effort or strategy, but through the specific quality of being fully present with another person without asking anything of them in return. She stood with that fact in the lobby and did not yet know what to do with it. She filed it where she filed everything she had not yet resolved, which was a place she privately thought of as the shelf. The mental space she maintained for things that required more information before they could be handled properly. The shelf had a lot on it lately. The car arrived. She got in. It was only when she was in the back seat moving through the night version of Seoul. The city in its second shift. Neon and motion and the particular energy of a place that never fully stopped. That she allowed herself to register what she had been carrying in parallel all evening, beneath the resignation letter, beneath the professional assessment, beneath the structure. She had been in Seoul for 3 years. She had built something here. Not just the restructuring proposal, not just the professional record, but the specific texture of a life in a city that was not the one she was born to. A favorite coffee shop on a narrow street in Mapo. A route she walked on Sunday mornings that took the better part of an hour, and past a market she had been to enough times that some of the vendors knew her order. A dry cleaner who called her by name and had once, without being asked, repressed a jacket for free because he said the lapels were not right. These were small things. They were the architecture of belonging. And they were what she was actually leaving if the project fell and the contract did not extend and the letter in her pocket became necessary. She had not named it that before. She had called it a professional setback, a contract question, a logistical problem requiring resolution. In the back of the car, moving through Seoul at 11 at night, she named it correctly for the first time. She was afraid of losing this city. Fear for Yanara was not a condition she sat with. It was information. She received it, registered it, and converted it into the next practical step. The next practical step here was to get home, sleep, and in the morning make the calls that needed to be made with a clear head. The project review had a timeline. The contract question had a process. Both were manageable if approached with precision. She knew all of this. The structure held it all correctly. What the structure had not yet found a place for was the fact that she had spent the best hour of this entire difficult day sitting on that corridor floor reading mythology to a child who argued that a death messenger might have chosen kindness if he had been given the choice. And the fact that when she got home to her apartment, which was very quiet and very well organized and did not have a second person in it, she was going to think about that hour before she thought about anything else. She turned her face toward the window and watched Seoul pass, and she did not stop it from being what it was. 3 days after the dinner, Kwon Dae-sik called. Not emailed, called. The distinction was not lost on Yanara, who had spent enough time in professional environments to understand that the medium carried its own message. Email was administrative. A phone call at 10 in the morning from a chairman's chief of staff was something else. She answered on the second ring. Dae-sik introduced himself with the brevity of someone who assumed you already knew who he was, which she did. He said that Chairman Kang would like to invite her to a follow-up meeting regarding the restructuring proposal. He mentioned a time and a location. He said, in the tone of someone delivering an amendment at the end of an official statement, Chairman Kang also asked me to tell you that Seori has not stopped talking about the mythology discussion. Yanara was quiet for one beat. How is she? Well, Dae-sik said. There was a pause that functioned as the equivalent of a small smile from a man who did not typically traffic in small smiles. She has informed the chairman that Josung Saja would have chosen a different job if he had been given the option. The chairman is not certain where she encountered this interpretation. It's a reasonable reading of the text, Yanara said. So she told him, Dae-sik said. He was not able to argue with it. Yanara was quiet a moment longer. Then, I'll be at the meeting. She put the phone down and sat with it for a moment. The meeting was professional, a follow-up on the proposal, which was either a continuation or a conclusion, and she would not know which until she was in the room. She had made no peace with that uncertainty and was not going to pretend otherwise. But Seori had not stopped talking about the mythology discussion. She set that on a separate shelf from the professional things, a different kind of knowing, and went to prepare for the meeting. The meeting was held in a conference room on the 32nd floor of Kang Group's main tower in Yonggu. Not the restaurant, not a neutral location, his territory, his building, his table. She noted the geometry before she sat down. Taewoo was already there when she arrived, Dae-sik at the wall. 2 other members of the senior team whose names she knew from the annual reports. No one else. Taewoo stood when she entered. Standing when someone enters a room. The kind of thing that requires no effort and costs nothing, and yet is so frequently not done that when it is done, it registers with a weight entirely disproportionate to its actual size. He had done it without making anything of it. That was the point. She sat. He sat. The meeting began. For the better part of an hour they talked about the proposal with the kind of focus that requires both parties to be fully capable. She was. He was. They moved through the document in sections, and it became clear within the first 10 minutes that the project was not being closed, but was being restructured, and that the restructuring was, in several key respects, an improvement on her original design. He had been working on it. He had read it with the attention of someone who was not looking for flaws but for possibilities. The amendments he proposed were not corrections, they were extensions. He had taken what she built and found places where it could go further. When they reached the contract question, he said, "I would like you to continue on this project, directly, without the London intermediary. A new agreement, negotiated here." She looked at him. On what terms? He named them. They were fair. They were better than fair. They were the terms of someone who had decided the work was worth what the work was worth, and was not interested in negotiating that down. She did not accept immediately. She said she would review the terms and respond within 48 hours. He nodded. He had expected that. The nod said so. Sayori asked if you would come for tea, he said, as she gathered her materials. She has questions about the second chapter of the mythology book. She said the Gumiho story doesn't make sense, and she wants to argue about it. Yanara looked at him for a moment. She's right that it doesn't make complete sense. Something moved in his face, almost a smile. I'll tell her you're coming. She had not yet said she was coming. She came. Tea at the Kang residence was not what she had prepared herself for. She had prepared herself for something formal. A living room arranged for guests, which is to say, arranged for the performance of welcome rather than the reality of it. Objects chosen for their impression rather than their use, a kind of careful hospitality that keeps its distance even while offering everything. What she walked into was a kitchen, not a formal sitting room, not a designed reception space. The kitchen, the working one, with a pot on the stove, and a child's drawings held to the refrigerator by mismatched magnets, and a small stack of books on the counter that had clearly migrated from another room and not yet made it back. It was a room that people actually lived in. It had the particular warmth of a space that had not been cleaned for a guest, that had simply been left as it was, which was real. Sayori was at the counter on a high stool, the mythology book open in front of her, a pen in her hand making small annotations in the margins. She looked up when Yanara came in. The Gumiho doesn't want to eat the hearts, Sayori said immediately, skipping any version of a greeting. She's just trying to survive. That's different, and the story treats it like it's the same thing. Yanara set her bag down and looked at the page. Sayori had underlined the relevant passage in pencil and written a question mark in the margin so large it occupied most of the available space. You're right, Yanara said. The story conflates motive and action. She's not wrong about what she is. The author is wrong about why. Sayori stared at her. Then she picked up her pen and wrote something next to the large question mark. Yanara leaned slightly to read it. Sayori had written, in careful Korean. The author was not paying attention. Accurate, Yanara said. Sayori looked satisfied. Taewoo made tea. He did it the way people make tea when they know how, with attention and without ceremony, the specific competence of someone for whom this was not a performance but a habit. He set a cup in front of Yanara without asking how she took it, and she looked at the cup and then at him. It was not the tea she would have expected. It was not the obvious choice. The standard green tea that every office in Seoul produced reflexively, the one that appeared on every meeting table as a matter of course. It was a barley tea, slightly toasted, the kind that took a specific preference to choose. How did you know? She asked. He looked at her steadily. Mira noted that you declined the green tea at the dinner and asked instead for something warm with less caffeine. She pays attention. A junior logistics coordinator noticing a drink preference at a formal dinner, noting it without being asked, and someone else receiving that information and using it not to impress, but simply to get it right. She held the cup with both hands. It was exactly right. That was the thing that settled something in her she had not known needed settling. Not the contract terms, not the professional extension, not even Sayori's annotations in the mythology book. It was the tea, the right tea, chosen because someone in that organization had been paying attention to her even when she had believed herself to be invisible. She sat in that kitchen for the better part of the afternoon. Sayori argued about 3 separate stories in the mythology book. Yanara argued back, with full seriousness, the way you argue with someone whose intelligence you have decided to respect. Taewoo sat at the other end of the counter with a document he was reviewing and said almost nothing, but he was present. The room had the quality of people who had learned, separately and differently, how to be quiet without it being uncomfortable. At some point, Sayori climbed down from the stool and went to get something from her room. While she was gone, Taewoo looked up from his document. "She's been different since the dinner," he said, not as observation, as something he had decided she needed to know. Yanara looked at her tea. "Different how?" "Steadier," he said. "She had a hard year. Her mother and I, the arrangement changed. She has been handling it very well. She is always handling things very well. But since the dinner, she is handling it less and simply living it more. I don't know exactly what you said to her." "I didn't say anything exceptional," Yanara said. "I just didn't treat her like a child who needed to be handled." He was quiet. "That is exceptional," he said. "More than you know." The room settled back into its good quiet. From somewhere down the hall, they could hear Sayori's footsteps, unhurried. She signed the contract the following week in Dasik's office, with a pen she had brought herself because she always brought her own pen to signings. It was a small habit, and it was hers. She did not celebrate. She went back to her apartment in Mappo, made coffee, sat at the desk by the window, and began the next phase of the work. This was how she had always operated, forward, without pause at the threshold, because the threshold was not the destination, and celebrating thresholds had always seemed to her like a confusion of the landmark with the journey. But she was aware, in the part of herself that she did not typically consult during working hours, that something had shifted. The resignation letter was gone. She had shredded it the week after the dinner. Not in a moment of ceremony, but because it was no longer accurate and she did not keep documents that were no longer accurate. The decision to shred it had taken approximately 4 seconds. What had taken longer was acknowledging, privately, what the shredding meant. Not just that she was staying, but that the city had stopped being a temporary condition and had become something she was building toward. 3 years in, she was choosing Seoul. Not as a temporary arrangement or a professional posting, but as the place where her life was taking its shape. She noted it, filed it, continued working. What she did not know, during those first weeks of the new contract, was that a parallel process was also underway. Not hostile, not calculated. Simply the careful due diligence that moved around any person who entered the proximity of Kang Tae-woo, a man whose decisions operated at a scale where proximity itself required assessment. It was not an investigation in any dramatic sense. It was a background review, quietly ordered by Tae-woo's elder sister, Kang Soo-jin, a woman who had been managing the non-visible architecture of the Kang family's interests for 17 years, with the precision of someone who understood that the visible structure depended entirely on what held it from beneath. Soo-jin had not been at the dinner. She had heard about it from Chang-sik, who had described the evening with his characteristic economy. Sayori had been in the corridor. The consultant had found her. The consultant had stayed with her. The chairman had spoken to the consultant briefly at the end. That was the account. It was enough. Soo-jin did not require drama to extract information from it. She extracted what she needed. A woman had entered the corridor of influence. Not intentionally, not strategically, but she was there now. And Sayori was attached. And Tae-woo had stood when she entered the meeting room. Soo-jin knew her brother. She knew what it meant when he stood. The review was thorough and conducted with the specific care of someone who did not want to find anything and was checking anyway. Work history, impeccable, and not in the way that impeccable records sometimes were, where the surface was polished so hard it told you something was being covered. Impeccable in the way that read as simply accurate. The work was good. The record was what it was. Personal circumstances. A flat in Mapo. Modest and her own. No visible financial precarity. A small and close family in London. A mother who taught secondary school, and a younger brother finishing an engineering degree. No concerning associations. No history of litigation, dispute, or professional misconduct in 3 countries across 11 years. And then the item Sujin had been specifically looking for and had not found. Any indication that what had happened in the corridor was strategic. Any connection to anyone who might have known that Sayori would be there that night. Any social media presence that had referenced the Kang family in the weeks before or after the dinner. There was nothing. Sujin sat with the completed file for a long time. She had a gift for reading the shape of information, not just the content, but what the content's arrangement implied. And the arrangement here implied something she had not been hoping to find, because it was considerably more complicated than a motive would have been. It implied that the woman was simply exactly what the evening had suggested. A person who found a child in a corridor and sat with her on the floor and read mythology and stayed until the dinner was over and then went home. Sujin closed the file. She did not call Taiwu. She called Changsik instead, because Changsik was the one who had seen it, and she needed the version from a witness before she decided what to do with her own assessment. Changsik told her the same thing he had told her before, in the same measured words. But then he said, "She sat on the floor, Sujin-si, in the dress, for the whole time. She did not look even once at the panel to see if anyone from the table could see her." Sujin was quiet. "She was not aware," Changsik said, "that I could see her. She thought she was alone with the child." Sujin said, "I understand." She closed the file for the last time. It was 2 weeks before Yanara found out the review had occurred. She found out not from Taewoo, but from Disik, who told her with the direct, neutral economy he applied to all information that he considered necessary to disclose. He said a background review had been conducted. He said it was standard procedure for anyone entering a sustained professional and personal relationship with the chairman and his family. He said it was closed, and its conclusions were not going to be shared with her, but he wanted her to know it had existed. She sat with that for a moment. "What were you looking for?" "What we always look for," Disik said. "Anything that changed the story." "And?" "Nothing changed the story," he said. She looked at him directly. "I need you to understand something. If this is going to work, any of it, the project, whatever this is becoming with Sayori, I need to be told about these things before they happen, not after." Disik held her gaze. He was not a man who flinched from direct statements. He appreciated them, in fact, in the specific way that people who spend their professional lives navigating the indirectness of others appreciate someone who simply does not bother with it. "I'll convey that to the chairman," he said. "I'd like to convey it to the chairman," she said. That meeting happened on a Tuesday, in the same conference room as before. Taewoo was already seated. She sat down, did not open with small talk, and said, "I understand a review is conducted. I understand it's closed. I'm not asking about the findings. I'm asking that going forward, anything that concerns me or involves me is raised with me directly, before it is actioned. Not as a demand. As a condition." Taewoo looked at her. "That's a reasonable condition." "I know it is." Something moved at the corner of his expression. "I should have told you before Disik did. I'm aware of that." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet for a moment. This was, she had come to understand, the pause he used when he was going to say something that had not been processed through the professional filter first. Because I didn't know how to tell you something I had ordered before I fully understood what I thought of you. And by the time I understood what I thought of you, I was hoping it would resolve without your awareness. He paused. That was the wrong decision. She looked at him. Yes, she said. It was. A pause. Thank you for saying so. The room settled. Then she said, Your sister, Sujin. Was she behind it? He did not ask how she knew he had a sister. Yes. She was right to do it, Yanara said. He looked genuinely surprised. She was protecting Sayori, Yanara said. That is the right instinct. The review was the wrong instrument, but the instinct was correct. I don't want anyone around that child who hasn't been held to some kind of account, including me. She paused. If Sujin wants to meet me directly, I'm available. She'll get more from an hour's conversation than from a file. He was quiet for a long moment. She will say you are not what she expected. Most people do, Yanara said. I've stopped minding. Sujin came to the coffee shop in Mapo on a Saturday morning. She had chosen the time and the location herself, which Yanara understood as the opening position of a woman who intended to conduct this meeting on her own terms. Yanara had been there first and had ordered already, which was her own opening position, though she would not have called it that. Sujin was not what Yanara had assembled from the file she had received on her in return, a summary of professional role and family history that Dasik had offered, unprompted, after the Tuesday meeting. The summary described a woman of significant capability and vigilance. What walked into the coffee shop was that, but also something else. Something the summary had not captured because summaries were not built for it. Sujin was tired. Not physically. The particular exhaustion of someone who had been the careful one for so long that careful had become indistinguishable from who they were. She sat down across from Yanara and looked at her without preamble. My brother stood when you entered a meeting room, she said. He has not done that for a non-family member in 8 years. Yanara looked at her. I'm aware of what it meant. Good, Sujin said. Then we can skip that part. They looked at each other for a moment. Two women who had both built very good structures for keeping the world at the right distance, sitting across a small table in a coffee shop in Mapo, deciding whether they were going to be honest with each other. Sujin spoke first. I need to know that Sayori is not going to be hurt. I need to know that whatever this is becoming, and I understand you may not be able to tell me what it is becoming because you may not know yet. I need to know that if it stops cleanly. She does not detach easily. She has not had an easy year. I know, Yanara said. She told me. Sujin looked at her. She told you. She said her father didn't always know what the quiet meant. She said it simply. She was not asking for anything, just stating the reality. Sujin was quiet. Something behind her face shifted. Not softened, reorganized. The way a structure shifts when a new piece of information changes what it is holding. She hasn't said that to anyone else? Sujin said quietly. I know, Yanara said. A pause. I can't promise you what this becomes, Yanara said. I can tell you that I don't enter into things I'm not prepared to honor. And I can tell you that I have not looked at Sayori once as anything other than exactly who she is, which is a very particular and serious person who deserves to be treated accordingly. She paused. I can't give you certainty. I can give you accuracy. Sujin looked at her for a long moment. She had a method for reading people that she had developed and refined over 17 years of protecting a family from the particular variety of threats that arrived wearing good intentions. The method was imperfect. No method was perfect. But it was hers, and she trusted it more than she trusted most things. What it told her about Yanara Obi was not that she was without risk. Risk was structural. It was present in anyone who mattered to someone you loved. What it told her was something simpler, that the accuracy she was offering was the real thing, that there was no script operating beneath the words, that the woman across the table had sat on that service corridor floor in an evening dress with her niece and argued about a death messenger's job satisfaction because it was the right thing to do in that moment, and that was the complete explanation. "You are not what I expected," Sujin said. "What did you expect?" "Something easier to categorize." Yanara looked at her. Would that have been better? Or worse? Sujin considered this. "Easier," she said. "Not better." She picked up her coffee. Yanara picked up hers. They sat in the coffee shop in Mapo, while Sol went about its Saturday morning business outside the window, bright and cold, the particular sharp clarity of a winter day when the sky had decided to cooperate. And they talked for an hour and 40 minutes. Not easily, not warmly, not immediately, but honestly, which, as it turned out, was the only thing either of them had been looking for. When Sujin left, she paused at the door and turned back. "Sayori's birthday is in 6 weeks," she said. "She has not said what she wants. She has been very quiet about it." A pause. "She did mention the mythology book, the next volume." Yanara looked at her steadily. "I know where to find it." Sujin nodded once. Then she left. Yanara sat for a while after the door closed, her coffee cooling, and the Saturday noise of the street filling the space that the conversation had occupied. She thought about walls, about the specific and necessary walls built from legitimate experience, the ones that keep the weather out, that make a life manageable, that let a person function in rooms that were not built for them. And she thought about doors, not dramatic exits or grand openings. Just the small, quiet finding of a door in a structure you have been living in so long you had forgotten it had any. She had found one. She was not going to pretend she hadn't. She turned her collar up against the cold coming through the gap in the door as another customer left, and she sat there a little longer in the city she had claimed as her own, and she let it be what it was. Sayori came to Yanara's apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 days before her birthday. Nobody had arranged it. Taewoo had mentioned it might happen, and then deliberately said nothing more, because he understood. In the specific way he understood most things about his daughter, that arranged things were not what Sayori was doing when she was doing real things. She had taken the subway with Dasik, who remained in the lobby of the building because she had asked him to, with the precise and serious tone she used when she had made a decision and was not entertaining amendments. She knocked. Yanara opened the door. Sayori was wearing her weekend clothes, not the careful dress of the dinner, not the performance of formality. Just a child in a warm jacket, with her mythology book tucked under one arm and a small cloth bag held in both hands. She looked like what she was, an 8-year-old who had come somewhere on purpose. "I brought you something," she said. "Can I come in?" She came in. She looked around the apartment with the unhurried attention she brought to everything new, cataloging it without intrusion. The books on the lower shelf arranged by height rather than subject, which she noted. The single photograph on the kitchen windowsill, a woman who shared Yanara's eyes and a man who did not, which she looked at once, and did not ask about yet, which meant she was saving it. The small plant on the desk that had been recently watered. She sat in the chair by the window, set the cloth bag on her knees, and said, "I made you something. My dad said I should buy something. I said no." Yanara sat across from her. "What is it?" Sayori reached into the bag and produced a folded piece of paper, thick and slightly uneven at the edges, the kind you buy from an art supply shop and use because you are going to make something real on it, not because it is convenient. She held it out with both hands. Yanara took it and unfolded it. It was a drawing. Careful and more skilled than you might expect from an 8-year-old, because Sayori did not do things without practice. It showed 2 figures sitting cross-legged on a floor, face to face, a book open between them. The figures were drawn in a style that was not childish, but was unmistakably a child's. The proportions not quite accurate, the lines not quite smooth, but the specific emotional truth of it entirely precise. You could see in the posture of both figures the quality of the attention they were giving each other, the weight of it, the realness of it. At the bottom, Saori had written something in 2 languages, in Korean first, then beneath it in English. The English read, "The person who sits with you on the floor is the person who is actually there." Yanara looked at the drawing for a long time. "I thought about it for a long time," Saori said. "What to write? My Aunt Sujin says that the best sentences are the ones that were true before you wrote them and are still true after." "Your Aunt Sujin is right," Yanara said. "I know. She usually is." A pause. "She said you talked for a long time." "We did." Saori considered this. She doesn't usually talk for a long time with people she hasn't decided to trust. She said it as plain information, not as a compliment. Which made it a better thing than a compliment. Yanara looked at the drawing again. At the 2 figures on the floor. At the book open between them. "Saori," she said. Saori looked at her. "Thank you for finding me at the dinner." Saori thought about this seriously. "I didn't find you," she said. "I just said a small thing and you turned around." She paused. "You found me." The room was very quiet for a moment. From the kitchen windowsill, the afternoon light came through at its low winter angle, the kind that carried clarity without warmth, and it fell across the drawing in Yanara's hands, across the 2 figures on the floor, across the sentence written in 2 languages at the bottom. "Can we read the next chapter?" Saori asked, producing the mythology book from under her arm with the brisk efficiency of someone who had always intended to get here. "We can," Yanara said. Saori opened to the page she had marked, which she had annotated in advance, which meant she had been thinking about it before she came, which meant this visit had always been about more than the drawing. They read for nearly 2 hours. Yanara argued. Saori argued back. At some point, Yanara made tea and made Saori hot chocolate without being asked. Saori held the cup with both hands. The mythology book accumulated new margin notes in 2 different handwritings. When Taewoo's name appeared on Yanara's phone with a message that the car was downstairs whenever Saori was ready. "No urgency," he had written. "Take the time needed." Saori read the message over Yanara's arm and looked up. "You should come to my birthday," Saori said. Not as an invitation, exactly. As a statement of the obvious that had been waiting for the right moment to be said. Yanara looked at her. "Are you asking or telling?" Saori thought about the distinction carefully. "Telling," she said, "because I have already decided. But I am also asking, because it is your decision and you are allowed to make it." Yanara looked at this child who had been carrying adult emotion since before she could spell the word for it, who had drawn 2 figures on a floor and written a sentence beneath them that was true in the way things are true before they are written, who had taken the subway with a chief of staff trailing behind her at a respectful distance and knocked on a door with both hands full. "I'll be there," she said. Saori nodded with the gravity of someone who had received a serious answer to a serious question. Then she put her jacket on, picked up her bag, and stopped in the doorway. She turned back. "The Gumiho," she said. "I still think she was just trying to survive." "I know you do," Yanara said. "Do you think she was?" Yanara looked at her for a moment. "I think that survival and longing are sometimes the same thing, and I think the story doesn't know how to hold both at once." Saori stared at her. Then she said, "I'm going to write that in the margin." "It's your book," Yanara said. Then she was gone. Footsteps down the corridor. The elevator, quiet. Yanara stood in the middle of her apartment for a long time after the door closed. The drawing was on the table. The mythology book was back on Saori's shelf, wherever that was, accumulating new notes. The hot chocolate cup had left a small ring on the counter, and she did not move to wipe it yet. She thought about what she had said, about survival and longing being the same thing, about stories, not knowing how to hold both at once. And then she thought about a dinner 47 floors above the city, and a resignation letter folded in a coat pocket, and a voice from behind a gap in the glass that was small, the way a held breath is small. She had not gone into that corridor for anything. She had not turned around because she knew what was waiting. She had turned because the voice was there and she was the closest person to it, and walking past was not a direction her body knew how to go. That was the complete explanation. But here, now, in this apartment, with a drawing on the table and a hot chocolate ring on the counter, and a city outside the window that she had decided to build toward, here was what nobody tells you about the moments you did not plan for. They do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with the weight they eventually turn out to have had. They arrive as a small sound behind frosted glass. They arrive as a child who needs someone to sit on the floor. They arrive as a question you answer honestly without knowing yet what your honesty is building. And then, slowly, over weeks and then months, you look around at what has accumulated. The mythology arguments and the margin notes, and the correct tea chosen by someone who had been paying attention, and the drawing in 2 languages on your kitchen table. And you understand that the life you are living is different from the life you had planned. Not smaller. Not what you expected. Just real. Entirely, unexpectedly, specifically real. She picked up the drawing. Read the sentence one more time. The person who sits with you on the floor is the person who is actually there. She set it down carefully, propped it against the wall where she could see it from the desk, and went back to work. If you have been watching this story and sitting with something, a moment you turned toward when it would have been easier to keep walking, or a moment you did not, and have been carrying ever since, I want you to know that I see you. This story was never about the dinner. It was never about who someone's father turned out to be, or the contract, or the tea, or any of the things that arrived after. It was about the turn. The single, unremarkable, completely ordinary turn toward a small sound in a place you were not expecting to be needed. You do not have to be extraordinary to do it. You only have to be present enough to hear it, and willing enough to move. Subscribe if this is your kind of story, because there is so much more of this to tell. And leave me a comment. Not about what you would have done, but about a time someone sat with you on the floor when they didn't have to, when nobody was watching, when there was nothing in it for them. Because that is the whole thing right there. That is the whole thing.